The Arctic Tundra, Travel Log and Notes. When I visited the Arctic Tundra, which is located in the far northern hemisphere, I went to northern Alaska. On my trip, however, I was told that Arctic tundras also exist in places such as northern Russia, Scandinavia, Greenland, and Canada. The climate in northern Alaska and other Arctic tundras is very cold. I learned that because of the cold, the soil is permanently frozen and only supports low-growing mosses, lichens, grasses, and small shrubs. On my trip, I saw some common animals that live in the Arctic tundras. For example, ermines, polar bears, brown bears, gray falcons, bumblebees, squirrels, snowy owls, seals, and wolves. Some animals I didn't get to see were white wolves, bald eagles, musk ox, reindeers, or an Arctic fox. As I complained about the cold to my travel guide, I was told that the average winter temperature in any Arctic tundra is -30 Fahrenheit, and the average summer temperature is only 37 to 54 degrees Fahrenheit. I also learned that precipitation is very low, and that rainfall may vary in different regions of the Arctic tundra. But in general precipitation for snow and rain is usually 6 to 10 inches. The latitude range for the tundra is from the Arctic Circle to about between 60 degrees to 70 degrees latitude north. Some general characteristics of Arctic tundras that I both observed and learned include that the Arctic tundra is one of the coldest and harshest biomes. It's a treeless biome, has extremely low temperatures, little precipitation, poor nutrients, and short growing seasons for about 50 to 60 days during the summer. And because of this, only small shrubs, mosses, and wildflowers grow there. Abiotic limiting factors in the Arctic tundra include very low temperatures, long and cold winters, strong winds, mostly frozen soil, low air pressure, short summers, and short growing seasons. The summers are significant though, even if they are short, because they melt the top layer of the permafrost, the frozen and rocky soil in the Arctic tundra, and allows wildflowers and other ground-level plants to grow. The melting of the frozen soil also results in small pools of standing water which create perfect habitats for mosquitoes and other insects. The abiotic factors such as minimal vegetation and the cold climate makes it difficult for animals to adapt and to live in the Arctic tundra. Some animals that manage to live here include ermines, polar bears, Arctic fox, white wolves, grizzly bears, gray falcons, bald eagles, bumblebees, squirrels, snowy owls, and wolves. After learning some abiotic factors, my guide proceeded to tell me about the main producers and consumers within the Arctic tundra. I learned that lichens dominate in the Arctic tundra and are the main primary producer. An interesting fact about them is that they appear moss-like, but it's really a mutualistic, symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an algae. The fungus consumes sugars produced by the photosynthetic algae, and the algae receives protection from the fungus. One importance of the lichens is that they can be covered with ice for up to 3 years and still remain alive. The Arctic willow, cotton grass, and bearberry are 3 other primary producers. What the main producing plants in the Arctic tundra have in common is that they can perform photosynthesis even in their cold and harsh climate, and they are all low-growing plants. A few primary consumers include reindeers or caribou as they're called, Arctic hares, ground squirrel, and lemmings. The reindeers are herbivores and eat cotton grass and other wild grasses. Arctic hares are primary consumers and herbivores and consume lichens and types of moss. The Arctic ground squirrel eats the Arctic willow, among other plants, and finally, lemmings consume Arctic moss and Arctic willow. I got to learn about some predator-prey relationships as well, and I was told that lemmings are in a predator-prey relationship where the predators of lemmings include Arctic fox, Arctic wolf, falcon, and the snowy owl. Another predator-prey relationship includes the musk ox and its main predator, the Arctic wolf. Finally, the Arctic hare's predators include snowy owl and the Arctic wolf, and also the white wolf. Arctic wolf, I mean. I was surprised to see vegetation in the Arctic tundra, so I asked how it's possible for plants to survive there in such conditions. My guide told me that there are multiple ways in which plants have adapted to the harsh and cold climate. For example, the plants there are small and low, with shallow roots because of the strong winds and frozen soil. Many plants also have fuzzy/hairy leaves to adapt to the cold, and have small leaf structures to retain moisture since water is lost from leaves. The plants can also grow under a layer of snow and carry out photosynthesis in extremely cold temperatures. And for flowering plants, they are able to produce flowers quickly once summer begins. My guide then went on to tell me about how animals adapt to live in this biome. He said that because the Arctic tundra is such a cold biome, many animals don't live there all year round. Many migrate and come to the Arctic tundra in the summer. But for those animals that stay, they adapt in the following ways. Hibernation. During the summer, the brown bear and polar bear eat just about anything it can find. Then it sleeps during the winter, and the food eaten during the summer is stored as a layer of fat underneath its skin. The layer of fat insulates the bear from the cold. Another adaptation includes the muskox growth of 2 layers of fur, one short and the other long, as a way of isolation from the cold. Thick fur in general is an adaptation many Arctic tundra animals have. The hooves of the muskox are also large and hard. During the winter months, this adaptation allows the muskox to break the ice and drink the water underneath. Polar bears is another example. They have small rounded ears to prevent water from entering their ears when they swim. The polar bear, similarly to the snow hare and snowy owl, have white fur in order to hide from the predators and in order to camouflage and more easily catch their own prey. The Arctic fox also adapts to the tundra using its fur color. The fur changes color in the summer when the fur is reddish-brown, and then in the winter it turns white to blend into the environment. Animals such as seals, polar bears, and brown bears have an extra layer of fat to fight the cold. The Arctic tundra is a beautiful place, but sadly, like many people, I've heard that we, humans, are harming it. I wanted to know more about how we cause harm and what to do about it, so I asked my guide. He said, "Global warming is a process which is harming the Arctic tundra. Global warming is caused by human actions such as burning fossil fuels, which emits carbon dioxide. That combined with other activities that give off greenhouse gases, such as methane, water vapor, ozone, and nitrous oxide, lead to more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and the naturally occurring greenhouse gases there are essential since they keep the earth warm. But with excess greenhouse gases, it leads to global warming. Global warming itself is not only bad for Arctic tundras because the permafrost begins to melt, but also when the permafrost begins to melt, the carbon in the permafrost is released and contributes to further global warming. The effect of global warming on the Arctic tundra is that the permafrost begins to melt, which alters the environment there and as a result changes what species are able to live in the Arctic tundra, and eventually Arctic regions and the animals living there might be eliminated. Possible solutions to the greenhouse effect would be to reduce greenhouse gas emission by finding alternate energy sources. And if we get more countries to agree to the Paris Agreement, that would reduce greenhouse gas emission too. But like that wasn't enough, he also explained another way in which human activities impact the Arctic tundra. That is through air pollution and ozone depletion. Humans emit carbon monoxide gas from car exhaust, sulfur dioxide from factories, and CFCs into the atmosphere. The chemicals in the air intertwine with the ocean and are carried to the far northern hemisphere where the Arctic tundras are located, through currents but also through wind. This leads to multiple harmful effects in the Arctic tundra. For example, it kills lichens, which are dominant and a significant food source in the Arctic tundra. They are particularly vulnerable to air pollution because they lack roots and get the majority of their resources from the air. Air pollution also causes acid rain to settle on the ground in Arctic tundra, and which harms vegetation and melts the snow. Ozone depletion is another effect of air pollution, and as UV rays more easily reach the Arctic tundra, it's harmful for the animals as they can develop skin cancer and cataracts. To reduce air pollution, we should use public transportation more, and in places where there aren't public transportation systems, we should construct some. Also, recycling, but preferably avoiding plastic bottles and bags, and instead using reusable ones will reduce air pollution. To avoid ozone depletion, we need to avoid items containing CFCs. They can, for example, be found in certain spray can containers, styrofoam, and air conditioning systems. Also, if more countries signed the Montreal Agreement, that would reduce ozone depletion. As my guide was telling me about all of the negative impacts humans have on the Arctic tundra, he also began telling me about polar bears, which are extremely vulnerable to the ongoing global warming. He proceeded to tell me that the polar bear is on top of the food chain. Its niche could be summarized to hunting for seals and its dependence on sea ice. Polar bears spend 50% of their time hunting and are only successful 2% of the time. Sea ice is significant for them since in the spring and summer months, algae grows onto the edges and forms the base of a food chain. Krill eats the algae, fish eats the krill, seals eats the fish, and polar bears eat the seals. Polar bears are built for swimming with their extra layer of fat, their thick fur, and their special skin between their paws. Polar bears are now, however, considered a vulnerable species. In 1965, environmentalists and scientists were first drawn to the polar bear as it was declared a threatened species that needed to be observed. Then, in 1982, it became declared vulnerable, which it still is today. Polar bears are vulnerable to extinction because they are an apex predator and because of their commercial value, their fur. Because of this, polar bears were being hunted before certain laws were passed. Polar bears are also case-selected species, which have a small number of offspring with a lot of parental care during a long period of time, meaning that they don't populate quickly. The polar bear is currently threatened because of global warming. Global warming, as described earlier, is causing the global temperature on average to increase. This results in rising water levels as the sea ice, which polar bears and other species depend upon for survival, melts. As the sea ice melts, a domino effect is created, and polar bears and many other species could potentially become extinct because of their relationship to the sea ice and because of the structure of the food web. As of now, there's an estimate of 26,000 polar bears remaining in the wild and in captivity. Efforts to recover the species and laws to protect the polar bears include the Endangered Species Act, which was issued to protect endangered species and those threatened by climate change. In the law, polar bears are protected from hunting and from fur trade, and 5 key nations in terms of protecting polar bears signed it: Canada, Greenland, Norway, Russia, and the United States. The agreement includes that they have to use science to add or remove a species from the list, and also for the basis of their conservation practices. Other efforts towards saving the polar bears include those initiated by WWF and similar organizations where people can donate money that goes towards efforts to save the polar bears. Another organization is one from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and it's a conservation plan of polar bears. Also, any acts that are for climate change indirectly help the polar bear, since climate change is what causes them to be a threatened species. The towards conserving the polar bear population